Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural edition of Shop Talk. Shop Talk is hosted by the Triangle SQL Server Users Group, and what we intend to do here is give an idea of water cooler style office conversation mixed with Q&A, a little bit of office hours. You in chat, we would love to have your questions. That's going to drive this show. So as you have questions, please pop them into chat. I will act as the producer and forward these questions along to our illustrious panel. So tonight we have with us in the top right corner, we have Mala Mahadevan. How are you, Mala?
I am well, thank you.
And manning the bottom section, Mr. Tom Norman.
Hey, Kevin, how are you tonight?
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, here's the way that we're going to do this. For this first episode, unfortunately, we won't have our final co-host, Tracy Baggiano, but that's okay. We're going to march on, and she'll be able to join us in a future event. What we'll do, first, I'd like to do some quick introductions or slightly longer than average introductions for our hosts so that you get an idea of who we are, what types of things that we are pretty decent with, and also where our interests align. After that, I do have some pre-canned questions already taken. If you have questions, please drop them into chat and we'll prioritize those because it's probably more interesting. In the event that we hit a lull, I've got a few things that we can talk about. Otherwise, we'll drive from your questions. If you happen to have a question and we are not on the air, because we're only going to do this on the air Mondays 7 to 8 p.m. So you've got a 1 hour block. For all of the other hours in the week, hit us up, shoptalk@tripass.org, and you'll see the email at the bottom of the screen there. So that email address, drop questions there. We'll add them to the docket for future episodes. So let's talk to Mala first. So we've said hello already. So Mala, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Mala. I have a background as a production DBA for about 18 to 19 years. Before that, I used to be a Visual Basic programmer. About 2 years ago, I decided to take a deviation from DBA work and get into doing more of programming and database design and stuff like that, which I really enjoy. So I joined Channel Advisor as a database engineer, and that's what I've been doing for about 2 years now, and I'm really enjoying it. I have been with the PASS organization and with the SQL community for a very long time. I think I joined PASS somewhere in 1999, so it's been 21 years now. I've volunteered with them in many different roles, actually, almost every role except serving on the board. So I know quite a bit of stuff and a whole lot of worthless trivia around what goes on in the community and crap like that.
You know
a
where
lot
the
of
bodies
stuff.
are buried.
But I really, pardon me?
I said, you know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah, but I really enjoy the SQL community and what we do there. That's a little bit about me.
Great. So Tom?
I'm Tom Norman. I've been working with SQL Server now for probably about 25 years. Things I really love is data protection. Definitely trying to make sure, I'm tired of data breaches. I'm tired of people losing their data. So very good at encryption, using encryption, data classification, auditing, obfuscation, security, and then also in the Azure DevOps realm. The company I work for in Denver, it's called KPA, been with them a little over 7 years, and basically we have the Azure Data Studio platform going on the database tier. We're doing CI/CD all the way through. So if you've got questions there, I love to go out to SQL Saturdays and speak. Probably don't get to do enough of that, and definitely don't get to do any of it now. And I love just sharing my knowledge and things I run into with other people. I do a little bit of performance tuning. I've been a database at my company. I've been the only database guy for many, many years. I do have one that kind of helps me a little bit now as my backup, but still, we're, so I've got SSRS, I've had SSAS and performance tuning. So do a little bit of everything. Master of a little bit, and don't know everything, but we'll see what happens.
Sounds fair. Thank you, Tom. And so I'll go last since I'm the last person here. My name is Kevin Fiesel. I run a predictive analytics team by day. By night, I do a bunch of this kind of stuff. Run the SQL Server users group, Triangle Area SQL Server users group out of Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. So wherever you are tonight, or whenever you watch this, that's where we're located. Mala and Tom are both board members. That's how I was able to rope them in on this entire endeavor. So run a predictive analytics team, heavy in R, know enough Python to hate it, love functional programming languages, love a lot of weird stuff, wrote a book on Polybase. 5 people have bought that book, so I consider that a commercial success given the topic. And that's enough about me. I know a fair amount about a lot of things and enjoy messing with a huge number of different types of things. So what we want to do is mainly focus this in on SQL Server related questions. So like if you come in and asking about DB2, sadly Mala is cutting out badly. I'm gonna blame her internet connection and not mine because that's
you're cutting off bad also for me, Kevin. So
it is my internet connection, and that's a shame. Hopefully not too bad for the audience. For our panelists, we may just have to repeat things over and over. That might make it more entertaining. We'll see. Yeah, you might be right, Mike. My echo suppressor does, in fact, mess up quite frequently, so hopefully a reset worked.
Much better, much better.
This thing is annoying me. I would turn it off, except then my voice goes up 2 octaves. And I don't have enough, I've got too many octaves as it is. I needed to get rid of a few of them. So, all right, let's lay this out. First question of the night. Hopefully this will be a little primer to get things going in chat. And hello, John Fan and Lysanki. Glad to see you both in there. So, first question. The inaugural Shop Talk question comes from Mark Gordon. So Mark asked me prior to this. It might be a little unfair because he actually asked it prior to when Shop Talk existed. But I'm like, Mark, you asked me a lot of questions. You would be great for this. And he is great for this. He's wonderful at asking good questions. Question he has. Management Studio 18.4. You've got that installed. Can you connect to both integration services in 2017 and SSIS in 2019? Now, that's a good question because it has a one-word answer. That one word is yes. But let's talk about it in a little bit more detail because there's some history behind this. So here's one of the problems. Prior to Management Studio version 17, Management Studio was built into SQL Server. So you install SQL Server Management Studio using the same media that you use to install the version of SQL Server. Like if you had SQL Server 2012, you would have 2012 SSMS, 2012 Database Engine, 2012 SSIS. And you needed that version of Management Studio to connect to that version of Integration Services, which got really annoying when you had to deal with, hey, I've got some servers in 2008, I've got some in 2012, I've got some in 2014. That meant you needed 3 versions of Management Studio running, which got to be a bit of a pain. And I don't know that there was, I guess there had to be some technical reason why that had to be the case. But after they broke off Management Studio, one of the nice things about the way that they took SSMS out of the database engine installer was that they could iterate off of that product more frequently. So by the time you get to the most recent version of SQL Server Management Studio, which as of today is 18.4, in the future there will be a different number, but today 18.4, that version of Management Studio is able to connect to at least Integration Services 2017 and 2019. Now, I haven't tried going back to 2016, to be honest. I probably should have, but Mark's question was specifically about 17 and 19, and my guess is you probably would have trouble connecting to 2016. You probably would have needed Management Studio 2016 because it had not been broken off from the product at that point in time. But when you start talking the latest two versions of SQL Server, 2017 and 2019, get one version of Management Studio, you can work with the Integration Services catalog in both of them with no major issues. I was looking to see if there's any follow-up.
And I just tried to connect to 2016, and it was
No dice.
with 18.4, no dice.
Okay, so that's confirmation. If you want to connect to Integration Services 2016, you will need SSMS 16. Also will not work if you have SSMS 17. So you need Management Studio for SQL Server 2016. In retrospect, I am really happy that they pulled Management Studio out from that installer. They made it its own installer. When they did it initially, I wasn't sure it was going to be a big deal. Now I'm like, yeah, I absolutely do not want to download Express Edition or go grab an ISO just to install Management Studio.
Very true. Yes.
Very true. Very true.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I love it too because it'll connect, 2017, or the SSMS. When they bring out new versions, they'll release, like 18.5 or 18.6. So it can connect, or they have new feature functionality that comes into Azure. Then you can connect and see that information too. So
the only thing, a nice thing I think would help is if it had an check for updates button somewhere and would allow us to update over what already exists instead of going and trying to download a new one every time. But I can live with that for now. It's not bad.
Yeah, if it had the Azure Data Studio help check for updates.
Right.
Or even like every time you open up Azure Data Studio or Power BI, hey, it looks like it's time for an update. It's a new day, new update.
I thought I saw in some version that you can now open up Azure Data Studio straight from SSMS.
So the latest versions of Management Studio and Azure Data Studio are starting to intertwine a little bit, where I have to be careful in what I say because there's a lot of talk, and some of it has been implemented, where you'll open up something like the task in Management Studio that allows you to export data using SSIS on the cheap, where it actually uses Integration Services, just doesn't tell you. That thing was ported over to Azure Data Studio, but it still uses Management Studio for that. And Solomon says that yes, you can open up Azure Data Studio in SSMS via the Tools menu. So they've got that direct.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I was just going to say that you can open it up now.
Yeah, you can also, there's also talk about things like notebook integration, where Azure Data Studio has those notebooks really tightly integrated. But if you're in Management Studio, you're not opening up a Jupyter notebook in there. But there has been talk about, well, what if we exposed Azure Data Studio within Management Studio and let you open up that notebook without having to write all the pieces in Management Studio. So that type of thing has been on the table. And there's some limited connectivity, cross-connectivity.
It's interesting. When I just opened it up, it also wants to set up my Dropbox so it can put the notebooks into the Dropbox and stuff. So that's interesting.
That might be a
I
third-party install you've got there.
Yeah, it's possible. I just clicked on Tools, opened up Azure Data Studio, and it popped that up. So interesting. Which brings me to the point, Kevin. We were talking a little bit before we got on. What about notebooks? What's the difference between notebooks on Azure Data Studio versus the other choices we might have?
All right, good question. Jupyter notebooks. I'll speak mostly about Jupyter notebooks. We've got other choices. For example, Apache Zeppelin is still around, but it seems like Jupyter has cornered the market. And the way that they cornered the market was essentially by letting everybody write every kernel for every language and every process against the same IPython notebook structure. So started out as interactive Python, got the ability to connect to things like R or Julia, hence the name Jupyter, Julia, Python, and R. From that, they expanded out to literally dozens of kernels, and that includes things like C#, F#, Java, C++. You can write kernels for all kinds of different languages, including PowerShell, by the way, and just be able to get that notebook experience, that pedagogical experience. Mike mentions that it is difficult to install kernels, and he is absolutely right. Depending on the kernel, it can be pretty easy. So, for example, the R kernel has been made really easy. It's a couple of pip installs, and you're about done. But I've tried installing a kernel for Scala, and that Scala kernel took a lot of effort getting to work. The F# kernel is not the most trivial. It was okay, but it was a little difficult, and some other languages I just couldn't get working. So that's the Jupyter world. Azure Data Studio notebooks are Jupyter notebooks. If you save them, they're in the same format, IPyNB. So it's still that IPython notebook, but Azure Data Studio does two things differently from your classic Jupyter UI. Thing number one it does differently is that it is a different management interface for a notebook. I'll talk about that because that's where I have my difficulties. Thing number two is that there are a couple of kernels that are specific to Microsoft that they have not open sourced yet. And one of them is a SQL kernel. So I can connect to a SQL Server using Azure Data Studio notebooks and just have things natively work, which is really cool. They have not open sourced that. I hope that someday they will, and that would be nice, bringing it into the main Jupyter product. But as of today, if you want that SQL Server, SQL kernel, you're going to Azure Data Studio. The other kernel, I'm not sure if it's been open sourced or not, but the Microsoft PowerShell kernel. So that allows you to create PowerShell notebooks in Azure Data Studio pretty easily. Similar feel to the SQL kernel, but actually even more, I'll call it kernel-y. And that feeling of being able to just work with code interactively, and I need to change this line, I need to change this function, so let me try rerunning this bit. With SQL notebooks, because you don't really save state between steps in a SQL query, not very easily at least, it is much harder to manage that state. So it's hard to know where you've been so far. Instead you kind of have to write it as just one shot go through.
So from a database professional, where would I use a notebook? Why do I even care about them?
Okay, where would I use a notebook?
Right.
There are a few things. Let's say you're a database administrator. Where I would use a notebook is I want some reproducible scripts. I want to train people. I want to say, here are the types of things we look for in our environment. Here's how I build my processes. Here's how, like, these are the main servers that we know of in our systems. These are the things we care about. Here are the measures that we're normally looking at. This server always falls over because this application is pushing it too hard, and so here's what we do to fix that. Or I have to troubleshoot, like I'm getting an error. Here's the general message. All right, well, find a notebook, help me troubleshoot, walk through this thing. Especially if it's a process that I'm not doing very frequently, and I may not remember the syntax off the top of my head. So that's where it would work really well for a database administrator. If you're an ETL person, notebooks are quite helpful when you want to spec out some code. So let's say that you're a C# person. You can easily write C# code in a notebook and just try out different things. Like, hey, is it faster if I build a loop this way, or if I build this dictionary and do a bunch of dictionary lookups? Or can I optimize a pipeline process somewhere along these lines? That's an easier experience for a C# person, where historically, long time ago, basically, if you wanted anything near real time with C# development, you're either building a console app or you're writing test cases. There are tools like LinkPad that allow for that nearer to real time experience, like close to a REPL. And there is the C# interactive console in Visual Studio that all of 6 people use. I am not one of those 6 people, by the way. It's a cool idea, but notebooks kind of give you that similar experience to what you've got in LinkPad, where, all right, I can write out my code, I can try step by step. This step didn't work the way I thought it was, so let me try changing it around a little bit and run it again. If you're a database developer, you might have some good reasons to have notebooks. Again, these are queries that I typically don't think about very often. My index DMVs, so let me make sure that I'm not missing any indexes, or according to the DMV, or let me check out, here's how I like to run SP who is active. Now I've got that keyboard bound, but those are a couple things. Then you get into the classic case for notebooks, which is analytics, where that integration with R and Python and Julia just makes that portion of the show sing, where I can run through data cleansing steps, I can run through data processing, and best of all, I can hand that off to you, and you can repeat the steps. You can double check me, validate that I have done the right thing.
So it sounds like that from a database professional, then it might be a great tool that, like, if you are a single person shop, or you need to even have a team of developers, if you're constantly going through similar steps in your job from day to day, then you might want to put it into a notebook so that someone would be able to repeat those steps, and it's not you, it's someone else on the team that could do it.
Correct.
Yes, exactly. So Mike had a question in chat. By the way, before I get to my rant about why I don't like Azure Data Studio notebooks as much as I should, I do want to show off. This will be the first time we try share screen, so let's give this a try on demand here. And Azure Data Studio, Mike's question was, what kernels are available in Azure Data Studio?
And we can see your screen, so it's good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's maximize. So here I am in Azure Data Studio, and I've opened up a new notebook. Inside the kernels, these are the kernels that are available to us. So we have that SQL Server kernel that I mentioned, as well as PowerShell. And then there are a few kernels that are specific for SQL Server big data clusters. So PySpark, Scala Spark, RSpark, or Spark R, and then a Python notebook. So I can So Mala, you may have to maximize. I'm showing maximized on my own screen, but it probably doesn't show for the same for
Okay,
you.
I didn't know I could.
So,
Oh,
yep.
yeah, that's better. Yeah.
So those are the notebooks that we're limited to. I tried early on to add F# as a kernel type here, and there's a lot more to adding a kernel in Azure Data Studio than even adding a kernel in Jupyter Notebooks. Meaning that this is the set that you're going to get as far as I'm aware. All right.
And I've got mine open when I opened it from Management Studio, which is fairly new, and it's the same list. So
yeah, and Mike also mentions that passing data between kernels in a single notebook is difficult, and that's where you'll get some capacity to use SQL Magic or to use different magics. Oh, I'm not even going to try showing this because this is saying, "Hey, would you like to upgrade on the air?" I'm like, "No, I'm not going to upgrade on the air."
come on, Kevin.
I have chutzpah, but I don't have that much chutzpah.
Yeah.
So let's go back to normal. All right. So going back through the questions here, passing data between kernels, can't believe it'd be possible, need an admin to install. Yeah, it's possible. It's difficult, but it is possible. Let me see if I've got my screen set up right. This is the excellent production values, well, outstanding production values that we have of Shop Talk. We have a team of producers just currently handling everything. Okay, John Fan has a question. So if we have to order or modify an orders table to do a couple of things, what should we create? So here are the requirements. Number 1, new rows go into the table without granting insert permissions to the table. Number 2, we have to notify a person.
What was the question?
So we've got an orders table, and table already exists. It's hanging around. So anytime we need to create new rows, we have to be able to insert new rows, but without granting insert permissions explicitly.
So this has nothing to do with notebooks.
No, this is not notebooks. I'll get back to notebooks, but I do want to answer a question because John Fan had this question in chat for a little while. So
sure, please.
Interruption. We'll call it an intermission. So
no problem.
New rows in the table without granting insert permissions. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2. Notify the salesperson who places an order whether or not the order was created, or excuse me, whether or not the order was completed.
Okay.
Those are the 2 things that he'd like to see.
So the inserting data, someone's going to have permissions. You can do execute as of someone that's got the rights to do it. If it's specifically that you're trying to keep away and not give Kevin direct rights to insert,
usually
then if you're doing it in an application or whatever, then you've got to turn around and actually you could have a service account do it and just do an execute as. That's the only way that someone's got to have the right. It's you cannot just, to my knowledge, you can't just insert a record with with no rights whatsoever. Somebody.
So let me.
Mala, unless Kevin, do you have a trick?
I do have a trick, but Mala, what are your thoughts?
I am absolutely in agreement with what Tom is saying. Someone has to have the rights. Typically, use an application, put the insert inside a stored procedure, have the application execute the procedure and insert it. That's usually the way I've seen it done. That's the way you can trap errors and do whatever else that can go wrong with the process too.
Yeah, Solomon says ownership chaining alone should take care of that, but I'm going to take the shotgun approach to this and talk about, here's the link that I was looking for, modulesigning.info. So speaking of Solomon, he's put together this website on using certificates to grant permissions. So what you would do is you create a stored procedure, like Mala was saying. You create the procedure that does the insert. Then you sign that with a certificate. The certificate user has the authority to insert into the table. None of the callers of the procedure have that insert right, but they have the ability to execute the procedure. So that way, if you have certain checks inside your procedure, like you're making sure that before you insert into the orders table, we're going to go and see if the order already exists. We're going to go to see if there's enough units of this thing available to place the order. You know, whatever reasons you have for preventing people from inserting directly into the table, you can put all those in the procedure, execute on that procedure, and then you control allowing people to insert data through a single controlled fashion, without granting anybody the insert right, except for that certificate user. There are a few steps to it. It's not incredibly simple, but Solomon's done a fantastic job of putting together the instructions on it. And
he is the master.
Yeah, so Solomon does mention that this is only needed if the owner of the stored procedure does not already have the desired DML permission, which is true. And I'm thinking of like maximum lockdown scenario where I don't necessarily want procedure owners to have that many rights. Or if you have things like cross database, where I need to go across databases, or I need to hit a linked server and go check something on some other server. So for more complicated scenarios, module signing gets better and better for you.
Is there a link or something to look that up?
Yep, it's in chat, modulesigning.info.
Yeah. Very interesting.
All right, so the second part, notifying a person. So a salesperson is placed in order. They've called that procedure, and it goes through a process. And notice how I'm adding on these extra things. They may or may not have actually been part of the question, but they are now. So salesperson inserts this, hits the procedure, and now whether or not the order was completed. When the order goes to a particular state where it's either order denied or order completed, how do we alert the person who inserted the row?
Well, there's several different ways you can do that. I'm thinking of, if you don't have a type of a queuing system.
I would think that the app has to handle it. Right.
Yeah. You can
return something to the app.
You can do it through like Service Broker. That basically Service Broker, you submit the order, then it can go and check and see if the order can even be fulfilled or not, whether you're going to be back ordered or it's going to be fulfilled. And it then could go to a shipping system, and then like if it does get fulfilled during that Service Broker, you can also fire off SMTP email. You can go email SMTP. I wouldn't use database mail. I would go directly PowerShell or some other way, basically to send an SMTP mail to the owner of it. And of course, within the order somewhere, you're going to have to basically say who owns that order. So you got to make sure to have either, if you're going to have a separate table or whatever, you're going to have to say this order was placed by salesman A, and then when you get ready to say that it's been fulfilled, you can send the message back to salesman A, and that might very well be a foreign key, or if you're trying to flatten the data, it could be actually on the order itself.
Correct. Very well said. Yep.
Yeah, summarizing it, Service Broker would be that would be a good use case of it. And email through external service. You can also go further if you need to. Let's say that.
So why wouldn't you prefer database mail, Tom? Why wouldn't you prefer database mail?
Database mails sometimes can, depending upon what you're doing with it, my understanding it's got some security loopholes. In fact, when I was going through audits when I worked for the credit card company, they didn't even want us to have database mail turned on, because you could, as a DBA, we could say, let's dump off our credit cards and send it through database mail to ourselves.
Interesting. Okay.
There's more auditing and all that kind of stuff that you can tell
Right.
what's happening if you're sending it through an SMTP client and other people are looking at it, versus when just with database mail, it's not, us as DBAs, we can send whatever we want. Let's dump the whole database of credit card numbers and send it to ourselves. And nobody would know it. Nobody would actually know what happened. So
Right.
Yeah, and Raymond mentions that you can see the data in those messages.
Yep, so that also. Yep.
You're not encrypting those emails.
Correct. So I definitely, the only thing I use database mail for is like, alerts and stuff like that tell you what's going on with the system.
Right. Fair enough.
Not for business processes. But I will tell you that when I worked for the credit card company, if we had it on, we got written up by the auditor. So turn it off. Yes, ma'am. So we even there at the credit card company, we actually, all those alerts, we even sent them via SMTP. We didn't even send them through database mail.
Yeah, Raymond mentions kicking off jobs to pull data and then sending it through Office 365. You could also use CLR if you need to have a CLR function that sends data. You send data to the function and it goes off and calls whatever remote service you have.
But if you're a database professional, do you know how to write a CLR? It's like a lot of us, it's like VB C#. What is that? So
only because F# not supported yet.
Yeah.
Then it'll be like VB C#. Still, what's that?
It's funny, Kevin. This past week we were actually moving a server off of IBM, and it was on 2008 R2, and they still had a DTS package running from 2000.
Wow.
And that DTS package actually had ActiveX script running. So we had to kind of try to figure out how to get in there. I was installing stuff from way back. I was begging people on Twitter, like, do you have this exe? I need DTS. I need backward compatibility. Anybody got it? So several people had it. So I got a copy of it.
Excellent. Every time I hear DTS, I think about all the money that Brian and Devin Knight made in translating DTS to SSIS automatically.
Yeah, for sure. But
DTS was a thing first time.
Yeah, it was. Granted,
it was the.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say after Access, it's the single most overused feature of any Microsoft product, at least in the data world.
Well, my company keeps buying.
People just loved it, because anybody could use it. The interface was so simple, so people used it for all kinds of things.
Yeah, my company keeps buying companies, so I never know when I'm gonna run into that old stuff again. So.
Linked tables from Excel, Raymond asks. Excel, some Excel features probably get in the ridiculously overused as well. You're right. So Mike's asking, that's an exfiltrate problem too? Yeah, there's a potential of exfiltration through DB mail, like Tom was saying, that just sends emails. Send an email including a result set. So if you have DB mail turned on, it's real easy. I think at the same time, there's also almost any process you have to send emails. If an administrator is going to run it, unless you have several layers of checks, it's gonna get through. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's definitely a place of that can definitely cause some security concerns.
Yeah. So can a stored procedure do mail if it's a library function of
Well,
SQL Server? Or is enable of mail ingestion the enabling of exfiltration? So it's not about email ingestion. It's not like you would send an email to MySQL Server at company.com, but that dbmail would allow you to send out an email to arbitrary email addresses. And
you can send an email through a stored procedure. You can do a call and
yeah, of
actually
course.
execute
XP
it.
send mail, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the other thing you just mentioned, Kevin, that was real interesting that I've struggled with for a while, someone just mentioned about putting data into Excel. Have you ever had the problem that when you're like exporting data, and if you don't use the right tool set to basically try to import data from an Excel spreadsheet, you get that OLEDB 2.0, you don't have this DLL installed. I found something just recently, and I don't know why it took me so long to find it, but I actually found SQL Server 2019 import and export tools, and I no longer get that error message of missing drivers because of Excel missing something. It's like going, you don't have this installed, you can't do Excel.
Right. Wild guess, probably a wrong guess.
Interesting.
But my wild guess would be that you would need the access redistributable for getting that Excel driver so that you could create an ODBC connection.
I don't have to have it anymore with this tool.
Yeah.
That's automatically downloaded and installed when you. I think it installs with SSMS.
Okay.
So, but I haven't had the problem anymore since I started using it.
Very cool. So that was
because I was so glad, because it's like, you need the 32-bit version, you need the 64-bit version. I'm like,
right. Like, oh, sorry, you can't have both installed at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. So so that just a key bit if you do a lot of importing Excel
So
spreadsheets.
what if you were to import from you were to move the package to a server, Tom? I suppose you would have to install it on the server too. Whatever driver, right?
Yeah, you would if you're going to do it on a server.
So how would you know which one it is?
Yeah.
Pardon?
With this import tool, you can, just as long as you've got access to that server, you can just go right across from your desktop right into the server.
Now, what if you want to automate the package, like just save it to a server and have it run and pull from an Excel periodically? So you would have to have the driver on the server then?
Yeah, you do.
Yep.
Yeah. With SSIS and stuff, and it is a pain in the butt to try to get the right driver out there.
Yep, that's where you get into the Microsoft Access redistributable driver, which includes Access and Excel ODBC variants. And then you'd use integration services, pop open that Excel ODBC driver as your driver to get to file location, read the file, get the inevitable VSIS needs new metadata error, and just get angry with life.
That's the one thing I never could understand, because SQL Server and Excel was owned by Microsoft, that they did not make it a whole lot easier to get data between the two. Yeah. Besides them using Access, no wonder. So.
Well, and the thing is, most companies do not allow a DBA to install stuff on the server. You have to go beg your sysadmin to try one driver and then another and keep going through it. It used to be such a pain.
Yep.
Oh, it'd take you weeks to try to get a spreadsheet into the database.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry?
It did. That is very true. So I want to go back to a rant.
You're back to being this chirping person.
Rap,
so you might want to, you might want to reset your setting again.
Yeah, so I wanted to get back to my rant.
Okay, get back to your rant.
Yeah, the Azure Data Studio notebooks. They've put a huge amount of effort into it, so I don't want to dismiss it at all. But there are some things that quality of life issues that keep me from switching any Jupyter notebooks over, or from saying, I really should create this as an Azure Data Studio notebook instead of a Jupyter notebook. So I will pop open to share my screen. And I have an incredibly simplistic notebook, but it does enough. So if I'm in Jupyter Notebooks, if I hit Shift Enter, it would run this cell and bring me to the next cell. Clearly it does not do that. Instead, in order to play this cell, I need to hit that little play button. Or I guess I could say run cells, and then that will run everything. But if I only want to run the one thing, I need to go over and hit this little button, or hit F5. All right, F5's okay. I'm okay with that. But if I want to pop to the next cell, there's actually not a good keyboard way to do it. I have to use my mouse. And if I want to clear the cell, again, there's not a good keyboard way to do it. I can clear the result here. Delete the cell. Normally I'm used to hitting escape, and escape would give you the command options where I could hit like DD and it would delete the cell. Doesn't do that, obviously. So there's a lot of keyboard shortcuts that just aren't available because you're always in the intra-cell mode where you're expected to type in code or text. Without those, this has gotten a little bit nicer because at least now they have run all cells. But there are some quality of life things that I really wish that they would implement, and there are some backlog issues, so they're aware of it. I'm hoping that someday they'll be addressed.
Well, isn't one of the problems too with a notebook that you need to be aware of as a DBA, especially if it's got PI and HIPAA data in it, that you need to go clear all the cells, because if you just save it, the data goes with it?
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anything in here, anything in this IPython notebook, like if I was going to hit Shift Enter to run it, but I just proved my own point. So all of the data in here, if I save this right now into an IPython notebook, it's going to save the JSON. And if I looked at the JSON, I would actually see each one of these as JSON array elements.
So the main thing to let
Yes.
people know, especially from a security standpoint, be careful of what you put into these notebooks, and if you need to clear the cell, then clear the cell. But it's understandable why they do it from a training standpoint, but just be aware of PI, HIPAA data, PCI data, anything like that. Don't go saving it into your notebook, or otherwise you might give away some confidential information.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. So the Ducaney mentions that, hey, everyone else is supporting Jupyter. As much as I love even Visual Studio, VS Code for Python has the same annoyances, and also marking blocks with things like that, which is not normal for Jupyter. It's kind of its own special thing. And so there's weird learning curve things. You're absolutely right about that. It is unfortunate. I guess unfortunate is probably the best way to put it, because we all know that under the covers, this is the same IPython notebook format as Jupyter. This kernel is what makes it special. I'd actually prefer the kernel be available in standard Jupyter, and that Azure Data Studio essentially be just a canvas for Jupyter notebooks. But until we get to that day, I guess I live with what's available, and I will use Azure Data Studio notebooks for things. I do have some notebooks that I like. But if I'm going to create something, typically that's going to be in a Jupyter notebook as opposed to an Azure Data Studio notebook. Raymond mentions that, so Mike was saying that, hey, there's a lot of work setting up a SQL Server. And I would say there is not a lot of work in setting up a SQL Server. There is a lot of work in setting up a SQL Server correctly. You can set it up really poorly, and there are a lot of really poorly set up SQL servers because it's next, done. Then, people eventually run out of disk space because they don't ever take transaction log backups. People have weird settings where, hey, I ran out of memory on my machine because SQL Server took it all up in the buffer pool because I said that you can have however many terabytes of RAM that is by default. So
that's the max memory setting.
Yes. And 3 dozen other settings that we could talk about in great detail. But yes, setting all of those pieces up, I still think it's less complicated than an equivalent Oracle or DB2 installation. But SQL Server on containers. So Mike's like, hey, can I get a SQL Server container? So let me share my screen again, because spoilers, the answer is yes. All right. So I'm not going to walk through the whole process of grabbing the SQL Server container, but I will point out that actually there are a few of them. Like these two at the top, MS SQL Polybase, MS SQL ML Services, are versions of the SQL Server 2019 latest that then install additional functionality such as Polybase and machine learning services. And at some point I may walk through the Docker files for those. I actually did it on an episode of Coding with Kevin, so tying all of the shows together. And if I go just a little bit further down, I have mcr.microsoft.com/msql/server, and I've got a few tags. So CTP 2.5, which is no longer viable. I should get rid of this tag. 3.2, and we can grab different editions later on of SQL Server, including the latest, where latest will be CU4 of 2019. So you can grab that container, start it up. It will run SQL Server on Linux. It will be pre-configured for a reasonable experience, not the best experience of your life. There's still some post configuration that you would do if you were running this in a real production environment. But if it's you playing on your laptop and you just want SQL Server to run, that's an extremely easy way to get it set up. Go grab the Docker image, install that image, run it, and there are instructions set up on Microsoft Docs that will take you through the whole process. So that's pretty easy to handle.
It's interesting that you mention all the configuration you need to do, which you do, if you set it up properly. We actually use Visual Studio, and we've got all that in a post-deployment script that basically goes in and runs each one of the things. And the vast majority are you can actually run in a post-deployment script. You can actually run to set max memory, to set max stop, and a lot of different things that will let you run. There's a few that it won't let you run, but the vast majority of them, you can just execute them right on through and basically say, here in this post-deployment script, go deploy this.
The guy, the PowerShell guy who created the install scripts, I'm trying to think of. SQL Stack, what's his name? I forget.
DBA Tools.io would probably have something.
Right, that has one too. Yeah,
would also have a way to do it. So
there's
several different ways to set up a configuration, and just I'm waiting for the day at my shop to basically I have one button I hit in Octopus, and basically it just deploys the server and does everything I need it to do, including restoring the databases and applying security.
Right.
Viable. It's a long way getting there, but it's viable.
Yep, it is.
And Mike, follow-up question, SQL Notebook. So the SQL Server kernel is not open source. That is correct. At some point, maybe it becomes open source. I would love it to become open source, but it is not today. The Ducaney mentions scaling out report server. So yeah, spinning up SQL Server containers and scaling out. I think that I know that the use of SQL Server containers right now is really low, that there's not a lot of community usage of them, especially outside of development scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there are some really useful cases where you could take a SQL container and turn it into a really interesting production server, especially with Kubernetes. It's going to take 2 or 3 more years, I believe, before you get the right mix of database administrators and sysadmins and DevOps professionals who are all working together at the same companies to make this a pattern. But I think you can get somewhere. We're definitely at the point where I can say, let's run a container in development and not have people freak out.
Yeah, container really makes is beginning to make a lot of sense. The only thing that, at least in our environment, is you were definitely showing all of them where the containers was Linux as the operating system.
Yep.
Well, we're still 100% Windows shop, so we want to run like for like, because once we hit production, it's going to be Windows.
Yeah,
Right.
And so we're kind of still holding back for Microsoft actually to either say we're going 100% Linux and everything needs to move there to Linux, or either say, okay, here's your container also for Windows. You can spin it up and you'll be ready to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath on Windows containers. I also wouldn't hold your breath on SQL Server going Linux only. I don't think either of those is happening. Windows containers, this is one man's opinion. Windows containers suck.
So how do you think those two things, those two are going to come together, Kevin? Because that seems to me like 2 different directions for the product, is to keep it on Windows and not have Windows containers. Eventually, not right now. Obviously, nobody is going to do an infrastructure change of this magnitude right now, but probably another 2 years. Somewhere it has to come together.
Yeah, I think where it comes together is that at some point the SQL Server team gets the code base so that the 2 operating systems are close enough in parity that we just don't care what the underlying OS is. It's not there today. So even if you exclude the stuff like I can't run this. I can only run certain parts of Polybase in Linux. I can't do it all. Or I don't have this functionality at all in Linux. Even without that part, where you're talking strict database engine, fully supported, there are some performance differences. There are some things that aren't exactly the same between the two. As those narrow down, and you get to the point where it just feels like one platform, I think you're going to start seeing people say, I'm okay with running this Linux server in production. I'm okay running a Windows server in production, and my application is going to hit both of them the same way. So
what's interesting, Kevin, is the next version of Windows is supposed to have the Linux kernel within it.
Yep. Actually, so if you're using inner loop of Windows 10, and you've got the Windows subsystem for Linux 2, and you've got the newest version of Docker for desktop, then you basically have native Linux kernels. So you have WSL now. Oh, that's true. It's no longer in preview. That's right. It's actually been officially released. So there's Windows subsystem for Linux, but there's the WSL 2, and there's Docker desktop, the very, very latest version. You get
your echo's going crazy again. So.
Oh. Fix this for next episode. We need to have something. We need to have something to improve later, right?
Right.
So Windows subsystem for Linux plus Docker for desktop latest versions of everything, you get the native kernel for Docker for desktop instead of having to run through Hyper-V.
And is that out now, you said?
At the very least, it was in preview when I was looking at it. I think it might be officially out, fully supported now.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was kind of waiting to see exactly what that is before I started playing around with it.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. Even WSL today is pretty solid, but or WSL yesterday was pretty solid. WSL today is really solid. Okay, so we have reached the top of the hour, so that means I'm going to cut off the broadcast. I probably should have stopped it when my voice was going dead again that last time, but I had to finish. Had to finish my statement. So, if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to hit us up, shoptalk@tripass.org. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you again. We're going to be here next Monday, 7 p.m., just like this time around. So bring your questions, bring your chat. It was awesome following. It was awesome following the conversation here and seeing the engagement. So with that,
Thank you,
everyone,
everyone.
have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.